The chronometer on Lewis's wrist blinked 14:47 in soft blue numerals. Queen Zariana wasn't supposed to return to the royal nursery until 16:00, which gave him exactly 73 minutes to finish the deep clean protocol and escape before anyone noticed what he'd been doing during his shifts. Lewis pushed his servomop across the translucent floors of the Zathian royal nursery, watching the bioluminescent cleaning solution dissolve the day's accumulation of shed scales and protein deposits. Through the curved walls of the habitat dome, he could see the triple moons of Zathia rising over the crimson landscape, their light filtering through the atmosphere in shades of amber and violet. He'd been working as a maintenance technician aboard the diplomatic station for 8 months now, ever since the Terran-Zathian alliance had opened employment opportunities for humans. The pay was exceptional, the work was mundane, and most importantly, nobody asked questions about his past or why a former xenobiologist was scrubbing floors light years from Earth. The nursery was his favorite assignment, though he'd never admit it to his supervisor. Most humans found the Zathian offspring unsettling. Their chitinous exoskeletons, their compound eyes, the way they chirped and clicked in ultrasonic frequencies that made human teeth ache. But Lewis saw past the alienness to something more fundamental. They were children, vulnerable and innocent, regardless of how many legs they had. Or didn't have. The war had taken its toll on the Zathian people. The conflict with the Drachner Empire had ended 3 years ago, but its scars remained. Chemical weapons had ravaged entire generations, and the royal hatchlings in this nursery were among the survivors. Each of the 7 juveniles was missing at least one of their 4 legs. Some were missing 2. The medical technology to regenerate limbs existed, but the organic materials required were rare, and the waiting list was years long. Lewis paused his cleaning as he reached the central rest area where the hatchlings slept in their thermal pods. 6 of the 7 were present, their small bodies curled in the characteristic Zathian rest position. The 7th pod was empty, little Anna named, coincidentally, after her mother was awake, attempting to climb the vertical play structure in the corner. She was the smallest of the brood, with deep purple scales that shimmered like oil on water. She was also missing both of her rear legs, making the climb nearly impossible. Lewis watched as she struggled, her 3 remaining limbs scrabbling for purchase on the smooth surface. She'd make it halfway up, then slide back down, releasing frustrated chirps that registered just at the edge of Lewis's hearing. He looked at his chronometer again. 14:52. He shouldn't interfere. The protocols were clear: minimal contact with the royal offspring. Observe but don't engage. Report any abnormalities to the Zathian caretakers. But Lewis had never been good at following protocol that didn't make sense. He set down his mop and approached the play structure. "Hey there, little one," he said softly, keeping his voice low and non-threatening. Anna's compound eyes swiveled to focus on him, and she released a questioning trill. From his tool belt, Lewis withdrew a small device he'd been fabricating in secret over the past 2 months. It looked like a simple mechanical frame, constructed from lightweight titanium alloy and equipped with servomotors scavenged from decommissioned cleaning drones. He'd modeled it after human prosthetic exoskeletons, but adapted the design to Zathian physiology using the medical scans he'd technically borrowed from the station database. "Let's see if this works," Lewis muttered, carefully approaching Anna. She watched him with curiosity rather than fear. The hatchlings had grown accustomed to his presence during his cleaning shifts. The prosthetic frame attached to Anna's thorax with magnetic clamps designed to interface with Zathian bioports. Lewis had studied the anatomy extensively, knew exactly where the connections needed to go. His hands moved with practiced precision, the muscle memory of his old life as a researcher coming back despite the years away from the lab. Anna held perfectly still as he worked, as if she understood what he was trying to do. The frame locked into place with a soft click, and Lewis activated the neural interface. The servos hummed to life, and suddenly Anna had 4 legs again, 2 biological, 2 mechanical. She took a tentative step, then another. The prosthetics moved in perfect synchronization with her natural gait, the AI system learning and adapting with each movement. Anna released a trill of what could only be described as joy, and then she was running, actually running, in circles around the nursery floor. Louis felt something warm bloom in his chest, an emotion he'd thought he'd left behind on Earth along with his career and his reputation. "Let's get you climbing," he said, smiling despite himself. With the prosthetics, Anna scaled the play structure in seconds, reaching the top and releasing a triumphant chirp that woke 2 of her siblings. They emerged from their pods, compound eyes blinking in confusion at the sight of Anna running and jumping with unprecedented mobility. Louis checked his chronometer, 15:03, still plenty of time. He pulled 6 more frames from his equipment bag, each one custom designed for a specific hatchling based on their individual injuries and body configurations. He'd spent every off-shift hour for months working on them, fabricating components in the station's maker lab, programming the neural interfaces, testing and retesting every connection point. The other hatchlings approached cautiously, drawn by Anna's excited movements. Louis worked quickly, fitting each prosthetic frame with gentle efficiency. Within 20 minutes, all 7 royal offspring were mobile in ways they'd never been before, exploring the full extent of the nursery, reaching areas that had been inaccessible to them. Louis stood back, watching them play. This was why he'd become a xenobiologist in the first place, not for the accolades or the research grants, but for moments like this. For the chance to make a difference, to bridge the gap between species, to help. He was so absorbed in watching the hatchlings that he didn't hear the airlock cycle open behind him. "What have you done?" The voice was like glacial ice cracking, deep and resonant with harmonic overtones that only Zathian vocal cords could produce. Louis spun around to find Queen Zariana standing in the nursery entrance, her 4-meter-tall form blocking the light from the corridor beyond. She was magnificent and terrifying in equal measure, her crimson and gold scales polished to a mirror shine, her crown-like head crest raised in what Louis desperately hoped wasn't a threat display. Her 4 arms were crossed over her thorax, and her compound eyes reflected the scene before her in 1,000 facets. "Your Majesty," Louis stammered, dropping immediately into the human approximation of a Zathian bow. I can explain." "You have violated 17 separate protocols," Zariana said, her voice tight with an emotion Louis couldn't identify. "You accessed classified medical data. You fabricated unauthorized equipment. You made physical contact with the royal offspring without permission." Louis kept his head bowed, his heart hammering. He'd known the risks, had known that discovery would mean immediate deportation at best, imprisonment at worst. The Alliance took security breaches seriously, especially those involving the royal family. "I accept full responsibility," he said quietly. "The hatchlings had nothing to do with this. I just wanted to help them." There was a long silence, broken only by the chirping and clicking of the hatchlings as they continued to explore their newfound mobility, blissfully unaware of the tension between the 2 adults. Then Louis heard something unexpected, a sound like stones tumbling in a river, rhythmic and repetitive. It took him a moment to realize that Queen Zariana was laughing. "Look at me, human," she commanded, and Louis raised his head. The queen was moving toward her children, her posture softening from regal authority to something more maternal. She knelt, a position of vulnerability that Louis had never seen a Zathian royal assume, and opened her 4 arms. The hatchlings swarmed her immediately, climbing onto her massive frame, chirping their excitement, showing off their new prosthetics with unmistakable pride. "Look at them," Zariana whispered, and Louis could hear the emotion cracking through her voice. "They're running, they're climbing, they're whole." She lifted little Anna, her namesake, and examined the prosthetic frame with what Lewis recognized as a scientist's eye. "The neural interface is remarkable," she said. "The servo response time is actually superior to our own medical prosthetics, and the materials, lightweight, durable, compatible with our biology." She turned her multifaceted gaze to Lewis. "You were a researcher before you became a janitor." It wasn't a question, but Lewis answered anyway. "Xenobiologist, specialized in cross-species medical applications. I made some mistakes, lost my position." "What kind of mistakes?" Lewis hesitated, then figured he had nothing left to lose. "I prioritized results over protocols, published findings before they were approved, used unauthorized methods to accelerate treatment timelines. I got results, but I broke rules doing it." Zariana was silent for a long moment, gently stroking Anna's head with one hand while the hatchling chirped contentedly. "You know," she said finally, "the official waiting time for limb regeneration for my children is 4.7 years. The materials are scarce, the procedures are complex, and the political priorities always seem to place the royal family at the bottom of the list. A gesture of solidarity with common citizens, my advisors say." She set Anna down and stood to her full height, looking down at Lewis with an expression he couldn't read. 4.7 years of watching my Bobbies struggle. 4.7 years of hearing them cry in frustration when they cannot keep up with their peers. 4.7 years of wondering if I failed them by bringing them into a world at war. Lewis felt his throat tighten. "Your Majesty, I..." And then a human janitor working in secret solves in 2 months what our finest engineers have been unable to accomplish in 3 years. She extended one hand toward him, palm up, a Zathian gesture of respect between equals. "You broke protocols, yes. You violated security measures, certainly. But you did what I could not. You gave my children their mobility, their independence, their joy." Lewis stared at her extended hand, uncertain. "What happens now?" "Now?" Zariana's crest flared in what Lewis had learned to recognize as amusement. "Now you are promoted. The Alliance Medical Research Division has been looking for someone to head the new cross-species prosthetics program. Someone innovative, willing to challenge conventional thinking, someone who sees past differences to fundamental needs. But my record will show that you were recruited directly by the Zathian royal family for a position of crucial importance." She gestured to her children, who were now attempting to build a pyramid formation, their prosthetics allowing feats of coordination that would have been impossible before. "Do you know how many other families have children like mine? Thousands, tens of thousands. And not just Zathians. Species across the Alliance suffer from war injuries, birth defects, degenerative conditions." Lewis felt the weight of it settling on his shoulders, but this time it felt different than the burden of his past failures. This felt like purpose. "I have one condition," he said, surprised by his own boldness. Zariana tilted her head. "Oh." "I want to train local engineers. Share the designs, make them open source. This can't be dependent on one person or one lab. It needs to spread, to adapt, to evolve." The Queen's laugh rumbled through the nursery again. "You truly did learn from your mistakes." She reached out and placed her hand on his shoulder, the gesture gentle despite her size and strength. "Welcome to the family, Lewis Chen. My children have already adopted you. I simply make it official." As if on cue, Anna climbed up Lewis's leg with her new prosthetics, settling onto his shoulder and releasing a contented purr. The other hatchlings swarmed around his feet, chirping and clicking their approval. Lewis looked at Queen Zariana, at the hatchlings playing with unprecedented freedom, at the triple moons rising beyond the dome, and felt something he hadn't felt in years: hope. "Thank you, Your Majesty," he said quietly. "No," Zariana replied, pulling all 7 of her children into her arms, their prosthetics gleaming in the moonlight. "Thank you, Lewis. You gave me back something I thought was lost. You gave my Bobbies their future." That night, as Lewis left the nursery to begin his new role, He paused at the airlock and looked back one last time. Queen Zariana was reading to her children, all 7 of them curled around her in a pile of scales and metal and unconditional love. They were different, yes, alien and human, biological and mechanical, but in that moment they were simply a family. And Lewis had helped make them whole. End.